The Babylon Project was our last best hope for Scott. A self-contained podcast, 1 hour long, located on the internet. A place of fun and discussion for Babylon 5 fans everywhere. A shining beacon in cyberspace, all alone in the night. It was the dawn of the 20th anniversary of Babylon 5, the year the Great War to free Bab 5 came upon us all. This is the story of the last of the Babylon podcasts. The year is 2014. The name of the place is the Babylon Project Podcast.
This is Maggie Egan, your ISN news anchor, and you're listening to the Babylon Project podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hi there, Babylon 5 fans. Welcome to another episode of the Babylon Project podcast. I'm here again tonight with Jim. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing well. It's gotten cold here in central Nebraska lately.
It's going to get down in the 40s tonight, and it's, the second week of September?
Yeah. All of a sudden, though, this evening, I don't know, this strange, bright orb appeared in the sky off to the west. I don't know what that is. It was really bright.
I have no idea. We've had nothing but this kind of gray cloud cover for the last 3 days.
Yeah, that's what we've had too, but it did clear off a little today.
On the good side, it's supposed to be, the same mid-60s high tomorrow. Except with some sunshine to warm it up. So you're supposed to be some warm sunshine plus the cooler weather. So I think I'm going to give Antonio his wish. He wants to go out to the rifle range, so we'll probably go put a couple hundred rounds of 22 downrange.
Well, I'll be doing yard work.
Oh, we're going to be doing that too. But Anthea's got a rehearsal, so it's some chance for some guy time.
There you go.
Now, which episode are we doing tonight?
Tonight we are going to take apart Believers.
This is episode number...
It's episode number 10.
Number 10.
From the first season.
Right. This was episode number 10, but its production number was 105. That's why it threw me for a moment. He's got the order that he plans to air them in, and then he's got the production number, and they don't necessarily shoot these always in the order that they're going to air in.
Oh, okay.
So, Believers, first impressions from you.
First impressions of Believers. Another one of those episodes that will make a person that is sensitive to the subject matter uncomfortable.
And that actually is by intent. Straczynski, how did he put it? I'll read the quote. This is borrowing from the Lurker's Guide. Word finally came back from our liaison with PTEN. That's the Primetime Entertainment Network.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, this is absolutely against the demographics of the show. Number 2, no studio or network executive in his right mind would ever approve this story in a million years. Number 3, it's a hell of a story. I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah. And I was surprised. I did not know before, but I was surprised to find that it was penned by David Gerrold.
Uh-huh.
Those of us that are familiar with the Trek universe know that David Gerrold was responsible for one of the most popular episodes of the original series, The Trouble with Tribbles.
Yes. Actually, there's in the writing, there's another. DC Fontana has wrote some Babylon 5 in the first couple seasons. Yeah, and there was another famous Trek author that did some of the shows as well.
Yeah.
And this guy's known more for his books.
A huge Trek author.
Yeah, go for it.
Mr. Peter David.
You're our Star Trek expert here, so.
Yeah, I read the entire New Frontier series, all 18 books.
Oh, good heavens.
And just loved them. Oh, what a TV series that would make.
Yeah. Though still, if they did more Trek, the one thing I would have and would still want to see more than anything else, and they can do this because while the actor's still alive. Remember, if Roddenberry had lived, DS9 would have never occurred, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to have seen Sulu captaining the Excelsior. That I just think would have been an awesome show.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of us that feel the same way.
That was what Roddenberry had originally planned, and the last movie was the handoff to them.
Yeah.
Look at that ending.
Raul, this is not a Trek
no, it's
show.
Not. No, it's
We're
not.
talking about
we
Babylon
are talking about
5.
Babylon 5. I think that's a good clue to let you give us a summary of Believers.
All right, here we go.
Archive. Access. Initiated.
An alien couple brings their son Sean to Babylon 5 in hopes that they might find a cure for him from Dr. Franklin. After Franklin's diagnosis, he determines that a rather routine surgical procedure will cure the boy. However, owing to the beliefs of the parents, surgery is not allowed. Sean will certainly die if he doesn't have the surgery. Franklin attempts to convince the parents that in order to save their child, he must perform the operation. But they are steadfast. Franklin decides that in order to save Sean's life, he will have the parental rights revoked. When he approaches Sinclair with this proposal, it is dismissed out of hand. Meanwhile, Sean's parents, believing that Sinclair will rule against them, approach Jakar, Londo, and Delenn in an attempt to find someone that will make sure that their appeal is heard. Each ambassador in turn refuses to intervene for various reasons. Going against orders, Franklin decides to proceed with the surgery anyway. He saves Sean's life, but the parents shun the boy, believing that the surgery has allowed his soul to escape his body. Later, the parents take Sean away to prepare him for the great journey. Franklin learns that this means a journey that follows death. He arrives at the parents' quarters only to find that they have killed Sean. In a subplot, Ivanova leads a squadron of fighters in an attempt to rescue the starliner Asimov that has been apparently attacked by raiders. After finding the Asimov intact, she sees a raider ship and, in violation of her orders, breaks off from her squadron, pursues and destroys the raider, only to find that there are several more raider ships entering the sector. She escapes. In the final scene of the show, the squadron escorts the Asimov to safety. When Ivanova is asked about taking the risk of violating orders, she explains that sometimes things work out. It may have been the case for her, but it was not so for Dr. Franklin.
Initiating plot analysis.
All right, Jim. Thank you for the summary. Good as always. That's got everyone sort of refreshed and back in sync with what happens in this episode.
Yep. So anyway, should we talk about, first of all, our guest stars?
Let us do so.
We had Tricia O'Neill.
Correct.
She played, can you pronounce that?
Mola?
Yeah. Mola. Okay. Yep. And she's appeared in some other shows, Star Trek,
Wait. You are a Trek expert. We gotta go. You can't just say she appeared in some other episodes, like Star Trek. She was
No, she didn't.
She was an important Star Trek guest appearance.
Oh, yes, of course. She played Captain of the Enterprise C.
Rachel Garrett.
Yes, Captain Rachel Garrett, who was killed at the end of the episode entitled
Yesterday's Enterprise.
Yesterday. She was in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise. That's where the Enterprise C came through a rift. Everything shifted to a different timeline. They were at war with the Klingons. The Enterprise D was a warship, not a ship of exploration. And in order to set everything right, they had to send the Enterprise C back through the rift. And unfortunately, Captain Garrett was killed.
Mm-hmm.
There's another synopsis.
Yep, and there's an important piece of trivia connected with her role as well.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly, she is the only female captain of a starship that we see in The Next Generation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Her career goes all the way back to 1972.
Really?
So, yes.
There's another important person, just to stay on Star Trek for just a small moment. There's another important popular Star Trek name that guest starred on this as well.
Yes, and that would be Stephen Lee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stephen Lee was in 2 episodes, The Vengeance Factor and Gambit Part 1. Though in Gambit Part 1, it was just there as a bartender. Now, Stephen Lee, though, had actually just literally 1 month ago had passed away, I understand.
Yeah, not quite a month ago on the date that we're recording this. Just a couple of days short of a month ago.
Uh-huh.
At the age of 58, far too young.
Far too young.
You know, I wonder about Babylon 5. It seems like everybody associated with the show passes away too young.
Well, part of that is the show was 20 years ago.
Right.
So, and unfortunately, one of our other guest stars in this episode has passed away as well. That was Silvana Gallardo.
Her career dates back to at least appearances on television into 1977.
Yep. And in Babylon 5, this is the lady that played Dr. Hernandez.
Yes.
And unfortunately, speaking of passing way too young, she passed away in 2012 at age 58
Also age 58, yeah.
Also age 58, far too young, of cancer, I believe.
Now, Raul, I got to ask you this. Are we close enough to the show, or should I say far enough separated from the show that we don't have to worry?
I certainly think I'm safe. I hope I'm far enough away here.
Okay.
And our last guest star was Jonathan C. Kaplan.
Yes. A young man then.
He played Sean.
Yes, he did. And he's not done a great deal of science fiction from what I can see here.
But he has been working very steadily.
Yes. Yeah. And he was 13 or 14 when he appeared in Believers.
Uh-huh.
His character seemed quite a bit younger.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, he did. He seemed more like 8 or 9 years old to me.
Yeah, he had some decent acting chops back then, too.
Yep. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the episode itself.
Okay.
I've got my Earl Grey here, so I'm ready to go. Do you want to take a look at, I guess, the B story first? Kind of separate that out?
Sure.
The side story with Susan Ivanova.
Mm-hmm.
She had a little lighter role shall we say.
Mhm.
They had a report of the Starliner Asimov having some difficulties. Its navigation system had some problems because they had a fire. So
Right.
they called in and got some help. And Susan was a little annoyed that Sinclair was going to send Garibaldi out.
She was more than a little annoyed.
Yeah,
She made it known in no uncertain terms that she wanted this mission,
yep, she
and
was.
that she needed to practice her flying too.
Yeah, otherwise she was just going to walk to and fro for a while, and then for a
Hmm.
change up, she was going to walk fro and to, and maybe even knit a sweater.
Yeah, and Sinclair was absolutely brilliant in the way that the look on his face and said, "Okay, you can go."
Mm-hmm. So she takes a wing out,
She
and
goes out, discovers that that there are raiders in the area.
yeah, it's Raider territory,
Yep.
and they come across the Raider scout. So
Hmm.
she does a naughty
Yeah.
and gives chase
And she's chasing one raider,
and
and as
takes it
she
out
goes,
and takes
yep,
it out.
and then is confronted by a whole bunch of raiders.
Uh-huh.
It certainly looked like she was going to be in some real trouble. But you know, the funny thing is we never really find out how exactly she got out of that fray.
Well, actually, if this was discussed on this was discussed online at the time. Basically, it was, we already know the Star Fury is a faster ship,
Right.
and we know that she's in a zero-G environment where the ships are fighting, in Newtonian physics.
Right.
So all she had to do was keep the thrusters going and flip around backwards and take off a few shots, keep the thrusters going, flip around backwards, take off a few shots, and get to the jump gate.
Right.
So,
Which she manages to do, of course.
which she managed to do, and Straczynski more or less confirmed that yeah, that's what had happened. As he put it, the actual encounter was based on that was actually kind of boring. So
Well,
that was his
I
excuse for not having to waste CGI and budget.
yeah, I just found that to me it felt kind of incomplete. It felt like a storyline that had been dropped.
It turns out it was not so much dropped as just never addressed. It was just one of those other things that was happening. Oops, well, unfortunately her ship got shot up and it's going to be in the shop for a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
But they do use it to provide some occasionally needed breaks in the main story.
Yeah. Which desperately needed a break every now and then.
Mm-hmm. In the case of that main story, really what we have, the reason it needs that break is because what we have here is essentially it's the conflict between science and faith.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, actually, I've been on record for years with this being probably my least favorite episode of the series.
Right.
And it's not because of the subject matter. It's not because of, the religious discomfort.
Uh-huh.
I think it's because, I'm a Christian. I've spent years and years studying apologetics and studying theology.
Mm-hmm.
But by profession, I'm a software engineer and a clinical scientist. When I'm talking about clinical scientist, I'm talking about cardiovascular research.
Okay.
So I think, in all honesty, that conflict that he sees there is a conflict that, on one hand, you can almost say it hits very close to home. though I would argue I don't see a conflict between science and faith. But more importantly, Franklin's actions as a physician really hit me close to home.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can relate to the position that he's been in. Oh, I don't know. Is this a good time? Is this a good time to dive straight into that part of it?
Well, we're going to get there eventually. Before we go into it, though, I want to point out that this is not a new subject in television shows.
No, not at all.
The way it is handled is new. But
I think it's one of the best handlings of the subject. I will say that.
I remember seeing, when I was young, an episode, it was Gunsmoke or a show like that, where someone needed a surgery to be saved, and the people's beliefs would not allow that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the line where one of the guys said, "Cutting is killing, and there won't be any surgery." So, yeah, this is not a new subject. However, it is handled in a new way.
Yeah. It is a relevant subject. You know, there are people that think, oh, gee, the letting out of the spirits, and they think some of the primitive tribal cultures, say in South America, where there's a fear or phobia of that, or there's some of those primitive cultures where there's a fear of having the photograph taken because they think it has captured their spirit. But no. Modern first world countries, Jehovah's Witnesses, don't accept transfusions based on the idea that life is in the blood. Christian Science largely rejects most of modern medicine. There's certain niche, typically fundamental, typically charismatic, that rely solely on faith healing and reject modern medicine.
Yep.
So it really is a relevant discussion, and even beyond just that medical context, the conflict between science and faith, I mean, it goes back to the great schism with Galileo and the Catholic Church in 1600.
So we have Dr. Franklin on the one side, the science side.
Right.
A very simple procedure is going to save this young man's life. He finds himself up against a couple, the boy's parents, who hold beliefs that if surgery is performed, his soul will be lost.
Correct.
There's the two sides. So how do we reconcile this?
Well, in this particular context, there really isn't a reconciliation, in my opinion. Straczynski intentionally set this up this way. It is an either or. There's no other alternative. Either the boy has the procedure or the boy dies.
Okay.
It's a non-reconcilable argument. One of the two things is going to happen. Sinclair gets stuck in the middle of having to make that decision.
Which actually, as far as the show is concerned, well, I should say, as far as I am concerned, watching this show, he made the absolute correct decision.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I will go so far. Remember, Sinclair is a Roman Catholic.
Correct.
He made, if I can phrase it this way, he made the biblical and Christian decision, in fact.
Now, for me, you're going to have to explain that, because from my side of it, he did not bring his beliefs into the decision that he finally made. I'm sure that it crossed his mind, that it would be wrong to let this young man die when it would be so easily done that he would be saved. However, he did step back and take the parents' beliefs into consideration and say, this is their belief, and rather than imposing his own beliefs on them and taking custody of the child, having him cured, despite what the parents wanted.
And that is the core essence of Christianity. Allowing people to have that choice, to choose life or to not, and to respect that choice. That's one area where the church, quote unquote, when I say church in this context, I'm talking about organized religions. Mm-hmm. That's one area where the church, as in organized religion, very often goes against the church as described in the Bible and set up by Jesus. That free will to make the choice is fundamental to Christian faith. Without it, you have basically a puppet master. And that goes, that's actually part of the answer. One of the things a lot of people have a problem with where Christianity is concerned is the question of evil. Mm-hmm. How can a loving God allow evil? The truth is, if you allow people to have the choice, you have to allow for the possibility of evil.
Correct.
So, from that perspective, Sinclair made the only choice that he could make and be true to his faith and his core belief system.
Okay.
As hard as it was to make, it was the correct choice.
Okay, and so what you're describing is at a very fundamental level.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, I can see entities out there today that would absolutely go nuts
over what I just said.
And then in the context of the show, that would absolutely say that no way, Sinclair should have decided in favor of preserving this boy's life.
And there's two groups that would do that. One group tends to be the theist. Now, I can't speak to other, I won't, well, I can, having studied them, but I will not speak to other theological positions than Christianity on that one. If they're of Christian or even Jewish, I would argue that kind of a decision is, for the reasons that I've already described, completely against the teachings of both the Old and New Testaments. Like I said, for other religions, well, in the case of Buddhism or Hinduism, where you have a reincarnate position, a rebirth position, whether he lives or dies in that perspective, the question becomes, is it really relevant? Because he would be reborn. If you take an atheistic position, reality is, and it's an unpleasant reality, the reality is whether he lives or dies isn't really relevant, is it? From a big picture. From the big picture.
Well, from a very big picture, yes. However, when it comes to our children, the big picture fades for someone like myself, okay? If it were my child, there would be absolutely no question. Yes, you will perform the surgery.
Right.
Okay?
But that's your child with you making the choice, not imposing that choice on someone else.
I was going to get to that. I would not be real happy with it if my neighbor chose the other path, but then there's really nothing I could do about it.
Well, unfortunately, there are people who think there is something that they can do about it. They call in the state and they have the parental rights. They have the parental rights revoked. I mean, and there's been court cases to that effect.
Yes. But that would be in the context of our world here.
Correct.
Now
Correct.
we're talking out among the stars, the year 2265.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, did Sinclair make the correct decision? Did he make the correct decision? He made the only decision he could make in the context of Babylon 5. But
Correct.
did he make the right decision?
I would say yes, he did.
Okay. So that would be a definite individual kind of thing.
But then I'm not only have to look at it from the theological perspective, I am also looking at it from the perspective of being a strong advocate of parental rights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not a case of abuse or doing something that's criminal or immoral. This is completely within the context of, and I have to be careful with my words here, but it's completely within the context of where the moral good, of a moral good.
Mm-hmm. But then, if for a moment I can play devil's advocate, maybe Franklin's advocate, the cure is there. It's right there in front of them. How can they not choose to preserve their kid's life?
Because they haven't preserved the kid's life. Once the chest was pierced, once his chest was pierced, the child who he was died.
That is a belief.
Correct.
Okay. So, I was thinking about this earlier today in preparation for this.
Uh-huh.
Does believing something make it so?
Well, again, this is why I have to speak from the perspective of a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
In fact, to operate on blind, this is one of the areas where there's a lot of misunderstandings. Faith, at least in the Christian sense of faith, is not a blind act of belief. Faith, from at least the Christian perspective, and since Sinclair is being put into that sort of central position,
Mm-hmm.
and when you look at the story, that is the classic science versus faith is typically a roughly 400-year-old Christian conflict. I'm taking it from that perspective. But
Mm-hmm.
faith, as a Christian defines it, is based on evidence. In fact, that's what the Bible actually teaches. You're told to test everything and hold on to what is true. You're told to always be prepared to give the reasons for your faith. One of the early churches, the church in Berea, was singled out by Paul as being more noble than the others because they took what he said and they tested it.
Mm-hmm.
And they investigated it. So, I mean, from its very foundation, it's been always based on what I like to call, and I'm borrowing a phrase from an apologist by the name of William Lane Craig, a reasonable faith. It's faith based on reason. Now, here is where we get into one of my areas that just makes me so incredibly angry with much of Christianity today. They have completely abandoned that thought process. For some reason, there are so many Christians who have just completely abandoned reason in favor of blind faith. They don't think the two have any connection with each other. Have you ever seen the bumper sticker, "The Bible says it, God wrote it, that settles it"?
Yes, I have.
Pardon my language here. I have never seen a bigger load of crap on a bumper sticker in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing biblical about that concept at all. In fact, Christian teaching is exactly the opposite: to test, to investigate, to learn.
This is the kind of thing that has driven me to agnosticism, if that's even a word.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Simply because I must have evidence. Okay. I learned in college in a writing course that when you say, I believe such and such, it immediately weakens your argument. Because in order to negate that argument, very simply, all somebody has to do is say, I don't believe it.
Yeah. The correct phrasing would be, I believe such and such. That's only half of the equation. I believe such and such because, and here are the reasons. Here is the evidence for that I base that belief on. Now, bear in mind, and again, now I'm not speaking as a Christian. I'm speaking as a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing as an absolute. In the area of medicine, in the areas of medicine where I've spent most of my research, I mean, it's just been time and time again, we believe something to be true. We've got this body of evidence behind it. Then something turns out, I mean, I was involved in what was called the CAST study, cardiac arrhythmia suppression trials.
Mm-hmm.
And at one time, particularly during the 80s, we were coming out with all these antiarrhythmic drugs to make irregular heartbeats go away. And turns out we were actually inducing arrhythmias, not getting rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're always looking at, and at that time, at the original time, we were certain this was truth. Reduce the arrhythmia, reduce the incident of death. Well, turned out to not necessarily be the case there.
So from your point of view, a belief would be a hypothesis that requires testing.
Right.
Okay.
And having looked at the evidence, I have no problem putting Christianity up to that kind of a test. So it seems to.
There are many who do.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many who would be who will probably be very upset with what you're saying.
Christians, you mean? That
yes.
I would, yes. Faith is not blind trust. Faith, and I wish I could remember the exact quote from Hebrews, but I mean, again, this is a biblical teaching. Faith is trust based on past evidence of what has happened or what a person has done. Faith in that person is past evidence based on what that person has done.
Well, then to illustrate, for instance, both of us are married. We have faith in our spouses.
Correct.
Okay. Because we know them.
Right.
When we first met them, we did not have that faith in them.
No.
So, experience is probably the best teacher. Experience
and study and learning about. Yes.
You're a very persuasive man, you know that?
Oh, I'll take that as a high compliment.
It is. It's intended that way. So, getting back into the episode, okay? Dr. Franklin has, shall we say, faith in his ability to heal this child.
Correct.
As far as his oath is concerned, as a physician, he must act to save this person's life.
Well, actually, according to his oath, and unfortunately my internet connection seems to have gone down again. According to his oath, I believe his oath is to do no harm. That is part of the Hippocratic Oath.
Good point. Good point.
And by operating against the faith and the wishes of the parents, and in some regards, ultimately the child, he did great harm. However,
if I recall correctly, Sean did say, I want to live. He did tell as a matter of fact, he told Sinclair that, did he not?
Yes, he said he wanted to live, but there was the but and the qualification of that. And then we cut away while he was explaining his religious beliefs to Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm sure every soldier that goes to war wants to live. I'm sure every firefighter that walked into the Twin Towers 13 years ago wanted to live.
Well, of course.
But under what context did they want to? It's not, and part of it is being, the no greater love hath a man than to give his life for his brother, but also the special act from the soldier in the field. Do they want to live at the price of running away and abandoning the brothers, abandoning the belief, abandoning what they believe is the right thing to do?
Right. Well, the episode was very well titled.
Believers, yes.
Yes. Because that's what it was all about, was everyone believing in what they were doing was going to be the right direction to go.
Correct. And, that's a real good point, because one of the spots that I had, because obviously you can see why I'm having the problems with just, and it's on both sides, both on Franklin's side and on Sean's family's side.
Mm-hmm.
Really, both of them are guilty of blind faith and faith without reason, if you think of it. And that being what, for this episode to have worked, though, it had to be in that kind of a context. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a room for the kind of conversation and the kind of discussion like we're having right now.
Right. But however, nobody was really wrong here.
That's true.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. No, actually, as I said, at the initial points, Franklin was actually taking the high road. When he dressed down the other doctor, he was right.
Mm-hmm.
He was absolutely, completely right at that point. It was later that he largely ignored his own advice. If you look at what he told her at the beginning, and at the end has a conversation, well, I'm going to operate anyway. One of the things that he was having belief in was that they would choose to have, at the end of the day, they would choose to have the surgery regardless of what their faith was, which turned out to be an erroneous belief.
Well, Franklin was true to his beliefs. Sinclair set his beliefs aside and considered that these people had their beliefs and he was going to respect those. And the parents had their set of beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was wrong here in my estimation, because everybody was true to what they felt was
Nobody
right.
was, yeah. In the one sense, I would agree that nobody was wrong. But when Franklin crossed the line of do no harm, which is part of his oath, at that point he violated his oath.
Well, he violated 2 oaths, actually, because he was under orders not to operate.
True.
And so his oath as a doctor.
Now, the oath as a doctor is a moral oath. The oath the oath of, it's not of, I guess, is it oath of office to follow orders is illegal. It is a legal oath.
See, now that brings up another argument. Does the medical oath supersede his oath to Earth Force, to follow the orders of the officers above him, the lawful orders of the officers above him?
I think that is something that you always have to weigh and balance. I don't think it may necessarily do so at first, but if you look at, let me put it this way: in a lot of areas, there's some room for the two to coexist when they're in conflict, where you're not necessarily violating completely, but at some point, then I think the do what is right would have to supersede that oath of office or that oath of loyalty.
Should Franklin have been court-martialed? for what he did?
I don't know. That's he certainly could have been. It would have completely have been in Sinclair's authority to have done so.
Right.
Did he have to do so? Obviously not. That's at the officer's discretion.
Right.
And remember, Sinclair even intimates that if Franklin had not made a formal issue of it, he might have been more willing to look the other way if Franklin did the surgery.
Well, and then of course what it kind of comes to at the end of the show is apparently, because we don't actually see the act happen, but the parents, shall we say, in the existence of Sean, because they consider that his existence has already been ended.
Correct.
And he needs to go on what they call the great journey.
He needs, Sean's spirit has already passed. His body needs to pass as well so he can continue and not be bound. And that is one of the parts I know that was a big issue for the studios, because that is not your typical Hollywood ending.
No, definitely not.
The standard Hollywood ending is, okay, the parents have the epiphany, and wow, he is still our Sean, and everyone's happy. There's a group hug. If Babylon 5 had taken that approach, the show would have had zero credibility. They took it to the only conclusion the show could have done and maintain the credibility.
All the way around, this show was about tough decisions.
Yep.
Franklin had to decide to disobey orders to go ahead and do the surgery against the permission of the parents. Hernandez helped him, despite what she had said before.
Well, no, actually, she was the one who was gung-ho, operate at any cost.
Did you feel at all, as I did myself, did you feel like Mola was very, very close to flipping over?
I think the way I would have to say it is she was probably, in some regards, the most conflicted.
Okay.
But in some of the ways in which she spoke for her husband, that makes me, at least at some points, question the degree of conflict. I have to give it a yes, but, or a qualified yes.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely got the feeling that she, if nothing else, at least was giving it some thought.
Now, there I do agree, because I think she, even though she decided with her faith, I think it was her that gave it the most reasoned thought.
Right.
In my opinion, at least what little thought there was given to it. I think the father simply stayed fixed in his faith without giving it any challenge.
I agree. Tharg was definitely not going to consider anything other than what his faith dictated. And Sean, as you said, he wanted to live, but he qualified that.
Right. Should
we lighten this episode up a little bit? Let's talk for a minute about the gloppet egg.
Okay. The industrial goo.
Yes. From the gloppet egg from the planet Placebo.
Right. Yep. Oh, that for me that was a total facepalm moment.
Yeah. But it was kind of neat though. It was a facepalm moment until the kid held it up and says he thinks it's an egg, but it's really just some kind of industrial goo.
Yes. Absolutely. So even though Franklin didn't pull anything over on the kid, he still managed to accomplish his goal.
Well, who actually was providing the placebo for whom here?
Good point.
Okay, was Franklin providing the placebo, or was the child helping Franklin out by acting like he believed everything he said?
He was, but by doing so, he was actually Franklin's. Even from that perspective, from that context, it still accomplished Franklin's objective.
Gave him something other than his illness to focus on.
To focus on, exactly. Yeah, I thought that was absolutely funny when it's like, yeah, the kid knows.
Yeah.
Kids are always smarter than we adults give them credit for.
Oh, they are incredibly intelligent. They can read people. I've always said, as a teacher, I have to be genuine with my students, because a kid can spot a phony from 100 miles away.
Yep, every time.
And one of the things that I think students appreciate is an adult that can actually say, I don't know.
Yeah, I've learned that, I'll put it this way, I have mouthed the words for decades. Since my son got into Cub Scouts and I became a leader, I live it now, and there are not truer words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have
you speak wisdom, my friend.
I have known teachers, I have sat in their classrooms, that want you to believe, here we are with beliefs again, would like you to believe as a student that they know everything. I find that when I'm in front of my band, standing at the podium, and a student, say in the clarinet section, how do you do the fingering for this note? I don't have a problem saying, I don't know, but I sure know how we can find out.
Yep. And the kids respect that.
I whip out the fingering chart, and here it is. And then I learn it too. I always tell my students... Hey,
even for your primary instrument, you're going to come across some alternate fingering that you're going to say, huh?
Oh, yeah. I always say I learn as much from my students as they do from me, if not more. I don't know, Raul, what do you think? Is there anywhere else to go with this?
Oh, heavens, yes.
Okay, let's go.
For the first area, Sean's family going to the ambassadors for help.
Oh, that's right.
What a set of contrasts.
Yes.
The two simple ones, of course, are the Narn and the Centauri.
Yes.
Jakar just simply doesn't see a political advantage for him to get involved, so it's not worth his trouble. Sorry.
Right.
Londo, yeah, he's more than willing to get involved.
Right.
For the right money.
Yes, somebody's got to pay the taxes.
He wants his bribe.
Yep.
Something else that I'm very familiar with. Kosh, they point out that Kosh has already been where they were in a way.
Mm-hmm.
In the gathering, he was treated when his government asked them not to, and his response was typical Kosh.
So Kosh's opening, how can I put this? The opening of Kosh's encounter suit in the gathering set a precedent.
It set one, but it didn't necessarily establish it.
Okay.
It was still considered, it was an adult, it was an ambassador. You can make some arguments there. The fact that it was a diplomatic issue instead of a parental rights issue.
Right.
So, and Kosh himself, the way he puts it, the avalanche has already started. It's too late for the pebbles to vote.
Yeah. I always love that one. That is a great Koshism.
Yeah, but it applies to this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're sort of stuck in the wind. And of course, then there's the Mabari response. Apparently, the Mabari have been burned on things like this before.
Mm-hmm.
And their belief system, the Mabari's religious belief system, forbids that kind of interference. And it gets back to the question of whose truth is right, and they've been on the wrong side of that kind of decision before.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting. I find that the response of the parents was actually rather hypocritical. They weren't willing to violate their beliefs, but they absolutely expected the Membari to violate. They expected Delenn to violate her religious beliefs to support them.
Right. And,
which is another one of my pet peeves, but
that's a reality. It happens all the time.
Yep.
It's again, getting back to school and the issue of fair. Okay. What is fair and what isn't? Okay. To a student, to a 10-year-old, fair is what's good for me.
Yeah.
In reality, nobody wants it to be fair.
Yep.
If life were fair, we'd all be driving Jaguar XJ12s. We would all be living in 6,000 square foot houses with swimming pools in the back. There would be no reason for anybody to be motivated to improve their position, to have the things that they would like to have.
Or perhaps a better way of putting it is fair is a delusional expectation.
Yeah.
Occasionally you encounter it, but
Yes.
As an expectation, it's delusional.
Right. And that's where life isn't fair comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not supposed to be.
Unfortunately, we see too much expectation and too much evil done in the name of fairness. And that's, I think, one area where Babylon 5 really keeps its relevance. And we'll see that as we go through. I mean, Sheridan eventually, becomes, when the command changes, is it fair what happened to him ultimately?
Life's not fair.
Life's not fair. Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
One other part to bring up, and this is where we will get, when Franklin does finally decide to operate, he basically goes God mode. And he's quite explicit with that with Sinclair. I mean, that the physician thinking he is God. I've seen it. I've had to work with it before. I mean, it actually sometimes exists, and that's one area where, like I said, it kind of hits a little too close to home. That's where he goes into the area of, he's got the obligation to preserve life, but he also has the greater obligation to do no harm. That is really one of the things that I take issue with, and like I said earlier, and this, I guess, is a good time to go into that point. It's a place that I've been in. Now, I'm not a physician. I'm not a doctor. Like I said, I'm clinical research. One half of what I am is clinical research. That means I've run clinical trials, primarily in the device side. I've been in the decision-making process that he's in. One of the clinical trials I was in, this was defibrillator work, fully automatic type of defibrillator. Yeah, I helped develop it. That's where that's where all of my patents, that's where all of my patents are in. I can appreciate the God mode aspect of Franklin, because what we were doing in one part of the trial, we were bringing patients into the electrophysiology lab. They were going into the study anyway. Mm-hmm. And the way I flippantly put it tongue-in-cheek is we were stopping people's hearts to see if I could bring them back to life.
Uh-huh.
I'm not joking. That really is. Now, they were going in for the procedure anyway. We were just a little more aggressive with it. But we were trying to induce a cardiac arrest. And if we did, at first, my finger was on the button, or actually it was a paired buttons. It was on the button to deliver the shock to get their heart started again. Once we were convinced that that was working right, then my finger wasn't on the button. I was depending entirely on the device to start their heart back up on its own.
This almost sounds like fringe science.
Well, I'll tell you what. You look at the defibrillators hanging on the wall at the airport or the public, the airport, the stadiums, the public buildings.
Oh, we have one outside of the office at school.
Yeah. Depending on whose it is, my technology is very well may be in it, and it's certainly technology that I helped pioneer.
Yeah.
So but that's how we tested it. Now, the point of bringing this up, though, that kind of control of life and death, it does something to your mind.
Really?
And it's not always a good thing. It really does something to how you look at yourself and how you view it, how you view yourself. Huh. So that's one aspect of where I said, part of what I didn't like about the episode was that it might hit too close to home.
Yeah.
That was one of 3 parts of it. The other part was having to make the kind of decision that Franklin had made, only from the opposite direction. There was one patient, half of the study was in that electrophysiology lab where we're doing the arrhythmia study. The other half was in the CCU with patients that had some sort of procedure or some sort of diagnosis that had them at a high risk of a cardiac arrest. And we wanted to be able to get as rapid of a cardioversion or of a defibrillation, depending on which was necessary, as possible. And the advantage, of course, of doing it in the ICU or cardiac care or CCU cardiac care unit, cardiac unit, is, you've got our device, but you've also got a fairly rapid response from the nursing staff. So if there was a problem, if our device wasn't able to recover the patient's rhythm, they still had the traditional crash cart that they could have fallen back to. Well, one of the patients went in for a particular procedure. There were some fairly significant complications, and we had the patient hooked up to the device prior to the procedure, prior to surgery. Everything was fine. The patient was disconnected and went to surgery, and unfortunately there were complications. These were the kind of complications, I think there was maybe 10 or 20% left of brain function. It's the sort of thing that, and this is going to sound cold, the patient would do very well as long as you remember to water them twice a day. Ethical decision time here. Do I let, in this case, this was the exact opposite as F. Franklin. The patient's brain was dead. There was no recovery. Do I let my device stay on that patient? I mean, they were enrolled into the study because the patient was considered high risk.
Right.
Do I let my device go back on that patient? And if they have a cardiac arrest, fairly confident that it would be able to respond in time and keep them alive, or at least keep the body alive? Or do I step in and say, no, this device is coming off. I'm not going to be responsible for prolonging that patient's death. My choice was the device came off. Now, part of that reason was, there was the possibility that the family was going to insist on a full resuscitation response. They weren't accepting. Their beliefs were not accepting that this person was gone.
I see.
So my choice was, okay, this comes off. I let the doctor know that I was stepping in as the person in charge of the clinical trial as a whole, of the developer, the company that developed the system, and I was acting on that authority to drop the patient from the study. Now, his opinion was, good, you're making the right decision. I actually don't know what eventually happened to that patient. I do know that particularly if they did have a cardiac arrest, they would have fulfilled their obligation to do everything they could to resuscitate the patient.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know really the long-term outcome there. I just know I was not going to allow that work to be used to prolong someone's death. I've been questioned even. It's like, well, who are you to make that kind of a choice? The answer is I was the senior scientist of the developer of this system. The authority and responsibility of making choices like that has been vested in me. So it was my choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the doctor would have made this, based on the conversation, was similar as far as his choice in the matter. And frankly, my taking the choice probably made his life a lot easier.
Yeah. Well,
So
I definitely would not want to be the one on the hot seat there.
I've also been in the position of seeing an accident or, where there's a response and a possible code on the street and have to ask myself, okay, this device has not been approved. It's still an experimental device. If that patient needed to be defibrillated, if he was pulseless and this is the defibrillator that's there and available, would I use it to save that patient? I didn't have to do it, but I already know, having been in this, I was close enough to this situation that I already knew it's like, yep, I would. So there's the flip side of it. So it's a position that I'm not exactly, I'm not a doctor necessarily, but it's a position that I'm familiar with.
So then what you're saying is quality of life would enter into your decision.
Quality of life would enter into it.
Yeah, the quality of the patients.
Yeah, part of it is that, and part of it is simply doing what is right instead of what is easy, to borrow from Albus Dumbledore.
Okay.
Well, there are a couple of other items. As long as we're in the subject of Franklin, one part I did not understand. Further along in the series, it's described that Franklin is a foundationist. Remember when he gets ready to go on walkabout?
Oh, okay.
He's described as a foundationist. Now I can't remember their exact beliefs, but I thought it was. Oh, can you peek at that real quick?
I am. Oh, you mean in your notes?
Yeah, because I don't have, not my notes on the web. I cannot get the internet from my computer. I believe it was theistic in some respect, but possibly more along the lines of panentheism.
Okay. Well, it's a real term, apparently. Foundationism Wikipedia. As presented in the science fiction television series Babylon 5, is an Earth religion, one of several that appeared around the time the Centauri made first contact with the Earth Alliance. The intent behind the new religion was to get back to the roots of all the Earth religions, pass the doctrines to the core of each belief system to find out what they have in common, and proposes that they are more similar than most would have thought. It further asserts that the core message of existing religions often gets lost when politics and money and nationalism get in the way of things.
Well, that last part I would certainly agree with.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I thought. I thought it was something like that. In this particular episode, though, and this is what leaves me scratching my head, Franklin seems to be taking almost more of an atheistic approach. Not even agnostic, definitely not foundationist, but almost a more atheistic position. At least that's how it felt like to me.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. What did you think?
Franklin was reaching for straws to try to find a way to get things done. I think at this point, if he had any religious beliefs, he set them aside and was trying to be the pure scientist, or rather more how he interpreted what his role was as a doctor. Okay? Then he seemed to be willing to grab at whatever rung he could get a hold of to continue climbing the ladder.
Okay.
Because he was kind of inconsistent with himself in the episode on a couple of occasions.
Yep.
You know, it's very much like the way that you get interpretations of the Bible by taking things out of context.
Yeah.
One of the most aggravating things that I have encountered in my life.
Not nearly as. Believe me, it's you. If you base it on some of what I've said before, you've really hit. That's one of my big pet peeves.
Yeah. Oh, so this foundationism, from what I read here, was as a result of first contact with alien races.
And yeah, that description of foundationism, that actually connects into something that Sinclair questions. And that's the one area, especially coming from a Roman Catholic, which means the line probably wasn't given to him by accident, is his question of what makes a religion right. If one is right, perhaps all are.
Okay. And I think that might be covered in the next part of this explanation. It says, one of the core tenets of foundationism is that God is too big to be defined by words.
Yep.
And that the closer one gets to defining God, the further away it gets.
Well, just the basic doctrine of transcendence, there's an element there. But you know, there was a quote, and I'm paraphrasing it because I can't find the exact quote. Someone had once said, all religions are the same. They only differ in areas of God, salvation, the nature of man, what we did wrong, creation, and eternity, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That comment there was the one part that really did bother me, because they might agree on some surface areas of morality.
Okay.
You know, don't kill, don't steal. You know, what is normally considered a moral life. But when it comes to the nature of the issue of deity, or if there's not a deity, even, you know, Buddhism does not have deity. Hinduism has 330 million deities. They do have in common, you keep doing it over and over again until you get it right, or until you've worked off the bad karma that you've accumulated. That's completely antithetical to Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. You know, Christianity, Jesus is deity. Islam, that's heresy. So, you know, all religions have atheism. There is no God. Christianity, there is a God. All religions do have exclusive truth claims.
Oh, yeah.
And that of everything in the episode, I think actually that's the part that bothered me the most. And That's one of the issues that when Franklin comes back with the idea of foundationism, that greatly annoyed me there as well.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I would have to say, especially after the conversation and the depth of conversation we've had here so far, if there's anything that I would have to say that I actually disliked about the episode, not that it hit too close to home, but that it disliked.
Uh-huh.
That was the part, that would be the one item that I would have had to have picked out. But then again, on the other side, Sinclair does a great job redeeming himself from my perspective, my own personal judgment, with his response to Franklin's comment that we'd be better off with no God. His response comes back with, what makes us human is that we care, and because we care, we never stop trying.
Uh-huh.
Which is profound. It was just a very moving. It was a very moving dialogue for me, at least.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I don't think so. My brain is rattled. My brain hurts.
But I will say this. This, for me at least, this was my brain rattled. Mentally, it was mentally exercising.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I think we just set a record for show length, so I'm probably going to need to cut at this point. Any final thoughts?
It was an episode that made me very uncomfortable. It made me think, and I appreciated it for what it is, but how it fits into the scheme of the entire picture or the story arc tends to elude me a little bit.
This was more of a standalone.
Yeah.
Hopefully our conversation throughout this helped where some of that discomfort areas were concerned.
I thought it was brilliantly written by David Gerald. I thought it was well directed and well acted. And
I would absolutely agree. I'm personally much more sanguine about this episode after the conversation.
At any rate, it looks like we've kind of torn this one apart quite a bit. It's going to be interesting to hear what our listeners have to say. Hopefully we get a little bit of feedback on this one.
The only thing I will insist on is civility. There is no place for ranting or uncivil behavior on the discussion. Very simple. You're an agnostic. I'm a Christian.
Yes.
We set a bar of excellence and a bar of respect that we won't cross. And all I ask is that I really want the feedback, but I want that standard to be continued to be respected. And of course, that's probably an unnecessary thing about to ask about Babylon 5 fans, because, hey, by virtue of being a fan of the show, you've already set yourself to a higher standard, I think.
I have to agree.
Well, my friend.
There it is.
There it is. What is our next episode?
We will be going to episode number 11, Survivors.
Ooh, that'll be fun.
Yes.
That'll definitely be a fun one.
A Garibaldi-centric episode.
Yep. Well, it came close, but no boom today.
Boom tomorrow.
There's always a boom tomorrow. Good night, my friends.
Good night.
Podcast terminated. Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.